Welcome everyone, thank you for joining me. This is the second lecture of a short course on livelihood research. Today's lecture is about the basics of livelihood research. My name is Leo de Haan and I'm from the Netherlands. Give me a second to share my screen with you. I'm Emeritus Professor of Development Studies. Before my retirement, I was rector of the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague in the Netherlands. The ISS is the oldest and leading development studies institute in the world. Before my appointment at ISS, I directed the African Studies Center in Leiden, the largest center in African studies in Europe. If you want to know more about this institute, I suggest you have a look at their websites. I was trained as a human geographer, and throughout my academic career, I have focused my research on livelihoods in Africa. This course is on the MA level and is open to all interested students, so not exclusively to my own university. The purpose of this short course is to make you familiar with livelihood research and to inspire you to use it in your own research. So I will explain what livelihood research is, how it started, how it evolved, and what it is doing now. This will be a substantive part of the course. But there is also a second purpose, call it a reflective objective, without which the first purpose would only be superficial. Next to explaining what livelihood research is, I will examine why it emerged and why it evolved the way it did. This second objective is about contextualizing livelihood research against the backdrop of a critical assessment of development studies itself. So let's get started. I call it the basics of livelihood research, and I present 3 short cases to start with. Think of this woman making cheese. Her life history was recorded by one of my MA students. The woman lived in North Benin, West Africa. At the time of the research, she was about 35 years old. She belongs to the Fulani people, who are cattle keepers. She is married but had no children. Her husband had a second, younger wife with children. The husband owned some cattle and cultivated maize and cotton. The woman made cheese 2 or 3 times a week in the rainy season only. Moreover, she got the maize to prepare meals from her husband. With the money that she earned from selling cheese, she covered her personal expenses on clothing and kerosene, and she bought her ingredient for the sauce that goes with every meal. In the dry season, when there is no milk to produce cheese, she depended on her husband. Or take tea sellers in Sudan. The life history of one tea seller in Khartoum, Sudan, not the women on the photo, was recorded by one of my PhD students. At the time of the research, the woman was 40 years old. She earned her living by selling tea, coffee, and a kind of donuts. Her husband worked as a casual laborer in construction. But he usually worked on short-term contracts, and quite often he couldn't find work. Their income was good enough to pay the rent and household essentials and to pay the transport to go back home to their home village, where the husband worked in cotton picking from October to December. When the couple did not earn sufficient income, their 2 show-going sons would work as loaders in the market. Although in these periods the households had to cut consumption and could pay rent nor school fees, no one went hungry. Or let's take a look at the disastrous effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on livelihoods. A recent survey by Gupta in the Middle Himalayas of India and Nepal is telling. There are various livelihoods in this region: commercial agriculture, pastoralism, including the sale of meat and dairy, carpentry and tailoring, migration, and work and rural employment schemes. Those working in regional towns also earned money in tourism. Lockdowns had dramatic consequences for all livelihoods. Daily laborers and craftsmen couldn't work due to the shutdown of markets. People working in nearby towns could no longer travel to work. Lockdowns coincided with the harvest season, but due to restrictions on movement, many farmers could not sell their harvest because only a few traders got so-called curfew passes. As a result, transportation prices were shooting up and produce prices at the farm gate slumped. Dairy farmers faced with the shutdown of restaurants tried to sell milk to their neighbors and also started preserving it in the form of clarified butter. Using the labor of family members returning from towns, many households invested more in farm-based production. Even abundant fields were cultivated again. Due to disrupted access to agricultural inputs, some farmers returned to traditional organic farming methods, using natural fertilizers by recycling livestock and household waste. As the cases show, people undertake many strategies that yield them food, housing, and money while using various assets and resources. The cheese-producing woman in the first case used milk from her husband's cows, and the husband also grew maize and cotton on his land. The household in Khartoum, in the second case, organized its livelihoods around petty trade, selling tea and coffee, and wage labor in construction and cotton picking, so their main resource was their own labor. In the third case, a variety of livelihood strategies were practiced. Commercial agriculture, pastoralism with the sale of meat and dairy, various trades as carpentry and tailoring, and migration that generated remittances. For these livelihood strategies, assets and resources as land, livestock, and labor were used. Therefore, in conceptualizing livelihoods, we theorize that people, called actor in the following diagram, need 5 vital assets and resources to organize their livelihoods. In the early days of livelihood research, these are called capitals, and we distinguish the following capitals. Human capital, which is labor, but also skills, experience, knowledge, creativity, and inventiveness. Natural capital, resources like land, water, forests, pastures, but also minerals. Physical capital, which can be foodstuffs, livestock, jewelry, equipment, tools, and machinery. Financial capital, which is money on a saving account at a bank, or in an old sock, a loan, or credit. Finally, social capital. That concerns the quality of relations among people, for example, whether one can count on support by family or mutual assistance among neighbors. These capitals do not necessarily have to be held in private property by the actor. For example, in some parts of the world, land, water, and forests are communally owned. Elsewhere, land can be rented. The important point is that actors get access to a particular capital when it is needed and wanted. Access means having or getting the opportunity to use the capital in practice. Thus, it refers to the real opportunity to cultivate a part of the communal land, to have a site to sell tea, or to use water for irrigation. It also refers to the likelihood for women to get money from their husbands to buy food for the daily meals. And it refers to access to information, for example, regarding opportunities for temporary wage labor elsewhere. To return to our first case, the cheese-producing woman. Among the Fulani, men do the milking. They determine how much milk to leave for the cows. The rest is distributed among the women of the family. A few years before our survey took place, this woman did not know how to produce cheese, and she depended on the sale of milk she received from her husband. Then, the sons of her husband's second wife became old enough to milk the cattle for their father. And they gave preference to their own mother over this woman in distributing the milk. She therefore did not have any milk left to sell and was deprived of her traditional source of income. She was denied access to milk. Or take the second case of the tea-selling woman. She carries 2 large bags containing her stove, cooking equipment and ingredients to different vending sites and street corners to prepare and sell her tea. She had to keep changing sites because she didn't have a vendor's license. If she would stay too long in one place, she would become a target for police harassment. Therefore, she couldn't make regular customers, and her daily income fluctuated depending on the location. She was denied access to favorable selling locations. Please take note that the 5 capitals do not freely float in space. They are embedded in social, economic, political, and natural contexts, not only local contexts, but also regional and national and global contexts. The third case about the effects of the COVID-19 in India and Nepal is a clear illustration of those supra-local contexts. In order to cope with the global pandemic, both national and regional authorities took draconic measures. The lockdown abruptly disrupted wage labor opportunities and market sales of agricultural produce, which affected dramatically the livelihood strategies in the region. Livelihoods are considered sustainable if they are capable of satisfying needs actors define themselves and of securing the actors against contextual shocks and stresses. The shock is violent and comes unexpectedly. Stress is less violent but lasts longer. Both shocks and stresses have their impact on one or more of the capitals. An environmental shock like a flood or an earthquake has impact on natural, human and physical capital. The same goes for climate change, causing extreme drought or excessive rainfall. It's an environmental stress. The second cause of shocks and stresses is the economy. Devaluation can raise prices of import goods dramatically, but may at the same time increase the attractiveness of growing certain export crops. Price policies aiming at low food prices in the cities may chronically frustrate the income generation of food producers in rural areas. The third source of shocks and stresses is politics. Violent conflict is one unfortunate but not uncommon extreme. The COVID-19 pandemic caused several shocks on livelihood. The disease directly affected human capital, and the lockdowns, a political decision to stop the spread of the disease, affected people's physical, financial, and social capital. To some livelihoods, COVID-19 developed from a shock into a stress. Because of shocks and stress originating from the context, local strategies temporarily make use of safety mechanisms called coping strategies. Coping strategies are short-term responses to secure livelihoods in periods of shocks and stresses. In periods of hunger, food stocks are opened up earlier on, and if these are used up, assets like jewelry or cattle are sold. In periods of economic crisis, people are inclined to save and to develop alternative sources of income, for example, migration to the city. Collection of wild food and hunting are very old coping strategies in times of famine. Relying on international disaster relief is a modern one. One reason why COVID-19 has such disastrous impact on livelihood is because the lockdowns blocked routine coping strategies such as distress migration to towns. Coping strategies are the short-term or temporary responses to external shocks and stresses. Depending on the intensity and the length of the latter, coping strategies fade away and normal livelihood strategies return. However, climate change will mark causing mechanisms to become permanent, causing coping mechanisms to become permanent. Thus, temporary coping strategies develop into more permanent adaptive strategies, and adaptive strategies result in adapted livelihoods. Take, for example, the Fulani in Benin, the people of the cheese-producing movement in case 1. They originate from the Sahel. They were once semi-nomadic pastoralists with their livelihood based on cattle and milk. Because of the drought, they fled southwards to Benin. And because they lost a lot of cattle, crop cultivation became more important than before. Their livelihoods became adapted. They are now agro-pastoralists, paying more attention to crop cultivation because of the loss of cattle was seen as a temporary solution, a coping strategy at first. But nowadays, it has become an adapted livelihood. But changes in livelihoods do not only result from the impact of external factors, but also from actors' own agency. What is agency? Agency means that humans have the capacity to act as agents. It means that they are able to make decisions and impose them upon the world around them. Agency refers to people's capacity to seek solutions to their problems, to find outlets for their ambitions such as happiness or the drive for increased prosperity and welfare. Agency also means that humans are able to change structural conditions. Therefore, actors on the one hand are contained by structure, such as climate change, but on the other hand, actors are capable of changing structures. Through human agency, structures may change. So also agency and not only structure may cause livelihood changes. The life history of the woman in the first case illustrates people's capacity to change. She became very discouraged when the sons of her husband's second wife did not give her milk. At first, she started to spin cotton for traditional garments, but this was not profitable. Next, she started to buy small quantities of milk from other women in her camp and sold it at a very small profit. Her secret was that she first skimmed off the cream and kept it for herself, which saved her from having to buy cooking oil. If, by the following day, the milk had become thick and sour, she mixed it with warm water to create more milk and sold it in the neighboring peasant village. She also used a slightly smaller measuring bowl than other women did. Then came the breakthrough. Together with some friends, she asked a woman from a peasant village to teach them how to make cheese. Cheese was already produced in some parts of the region, but never by Fulani women, because among the Fulani there is a strong taboo of heating milk, which is necessary for cheese making. Heating milk may cause bad luck to the herd. A real Fulani woman should not get involved with cheese making, which is considered to be a craft for peasant women, who are sometimes former slaves of the Fulani. Despite the dishonor, she and her friends started making cheese because it paid better than selling milk. Many more Fulani women followed suit. Agency enabled them to break the taboo and to improve their livelihoods. We also saw people exercising agency in the third case of COVID-19 hit Middle Himalayas in India and Nepal. Routine coping strategies were blocked by lockdowns, but new coping strategies were found. Dairy farmers started producing clarified butter instead of selling fresh milk. Labor from off-farm employment and returned migrants was invested in farm-based production, and organic farming methods were being reintroduced. Here again, agency came into play. And that is what I wanted to highlight in the second lecture on the basics of the livelihood research. In the third lecture, I will contextualize these basics of livelihood research, and I will discuss the rise of actor-oriented research and development studies as a reaction to the structure orientation of both modernization theory and dependency/neo Marxist theory. In addition, I will offer some initial reflections on issues like capitals, material and immaterial needs, and access to assets and opportunities. Meanwhile, you have the opportunity to complete some coursework and to join me in an online class on the basics of livelihood research. This short course on livelihood research uses the so-called flipped classroom model. This means that students go through lower levels of cognitive learning, remembering, understanding, during their preparations before class starts. This enables students to engage in higher levels of learning, that is, applying, analyzing, and evaluating in class with fellow students and the lecturer. You, dear viewers, can also take this short course through a flipped classroom. In practice, this means that for each lecture, your coursework consists of 5 successive parts. First, a video lecture with PowerPoint of around 15 to 20 minutes, which can be found on this YouTube channel. So start your preparation by watching the video whenever it suits you. If you are interested, there is also mandatory literature to read. The mandatory literature clarifies issues already discussed in the lecture. To a large extent, you encounter again the issues of the lecture, but the mandatory literature also examines some issues more in depth. Third, if you like, I can also provide optional literature. The optional literature presents additional explanations on relevant issues and offers practical, contemporary, and inspiring examples on how to organize research on particular issues. Of course, you are advised to read the optional literature attentively, but if you have little time, you should at least glance through it. Or I can send you an assignment. The assignment enables you to apply the subject material discussed in the lecture and the mandatory literature. Finally, after having completed these 4 steps, I offer you the opportunity to participate in online classes, either individually or in small groups. Date and time of online classes will depend on your wishes and what your schedule allows. During the online class, 1 class per lecture, you will have the opportunity to raise questions for clarification, to formulate critique, and then to engage in applying the subject matter by discussing the assignment. It's best to complete steps 1 to 4 before moving on to the next lecture. And it is mandatory for participation in the online class. The reason for that is simple. By completing these 4 steps first, you will have achieved already the lower levels of cognitive learning, that is remembering and understanding, and it means that the online class will become much more fruitful and challenging, because we, that is you, together with your fellow participants and me as your lecturer, will be able to engage in the higher levels of learning, such as applying, analyzing, and evaluating. So you start each lecture of this course on livelihood research by viewing the video in YouTube. On your request per mail, I will make available various materials, a document explaining the didactical approach, the mandatory and optional literature, and the assignment. Don't worry, all docs are open access. Date and time of the online class will depend on your wishes and what your schedule allows. So, this is all for today. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I hope to meet you in my online class and to receive your email. Bye-bye for now. See you at lecture 3.